Welcome back. All right, it's a busy night tonight in the National Hockey League, but this afternoon I want to keep you busy talking about the Florida Panthers. So Florida, of course, is in the spotlight for two reasons. One, the Stanley Cup championship team. Two, right now, is the ongoing feud, the one-upsmanship between themselves and Tampa, which that all feels like it's part of the code. And I've talked about the code before and how I don't necessarily agree with the code. I don't like the idea that, well, you hurt this player, so in the next game they'll hurt this player. Because eventually it just, how crazy does that go? When does the retribution stop? And then I've seen people talking about Department of Player Safety. I think part of it is that for the Florida Panthers, they are a team that's won back-to-back Stanley Cups. They're going to be very visible. Everybody's going to watch what went on. I think that makes a big difference, that their games are being played on the big stage. Everybody's watching, as opposed to during the regular season, where there's some dirty players that people may not be as aware of the fact that they could be dirty players. But I wanted to talk about some theories. I wanted to start off with the whole Gregory Campbell thing, because I keep seeing it in the comments. And it's not just here, I see it everywhere. So Gregory Campbell is the son of Colin Campbell. He is the assistant general manager of the Florida Panthers. And if you read the internet enough, you would start thinking, so the only reason the Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup in 2024 and 2025 is because Gregory Campbell's their assistant GM, and his dad called in a few favors to make sure Florida wins the Stanley Cup. This is a great theory if you want to make sure that your team isn't held responsible for losing a series against Florida or losing games against Florida. The Florida Panthers are a juggernaut right now, but they certainly were not. And yep, they hired Gregory as the assistant GM in 2023 because it's not because he's good at his job, which, I mean, I've seen that reports he's good at his job, but anyways, it's not because he's good at his job. It's just they knew that was the secret formula to get them back-to-back Stanley Cups. I don't know how they got to the Stanley Cup final in 2023 because Gregory Campbell wasn't assistant GM at that point, but it's fine. It's a conspiracy theory. It doesn't need a whole lot to hold it up. Now, Colin Campbell, his history, there's definitely some reason to furrow your brow at the name Colin Campbell, and I get that. November 15th of 2010, there was a report by TSN which exposed emails from Colin Campbell which were basically complaining about officiating, that his son was getting penalties he didn't feel he should be getting. And so he would email Stephen Walkham, the head of the officiating there, and I haven't seen anything from that. Now, here's the thing. I've never seen anything where it's shown that that's meant preferential treatment for Gregory Campbell, either as a player or now as an assistant general manager. I haven't seen that. Now, people will say, well, hey, the fact that Florida doesn't get suspended, which when I pointed out Florida has been suspended over the last few years, I've been told those ones aren't important. They didn't suspend the ones they should have before this. And then I've seen too, Florida does this every single game, which they don't. I actually watched that game closely between them and Chicago, looking for anything, and there wasn't anything there. Now, we'll discuss, we'll get into that. Now, the whole Colin Campbell argument for me, I'm not going to make it because there's absolutely nothing saying that Colin Campbell has done anything to ensure that Florida has any level of success. He left his place in Department of Player Safety before the 2011 Cup final, and boy, did Canuck fans have some opinions about that. That Boston destroyed Vancouver in that series. I know it went the full 7, but when Boston won, those games were not close. So it was Colin Campbell's fault the Canucks did not show up for games 3, 4, or 6. It was Colin Campbell's fault. And this is where it becomes, to me, it's more in the excuse territory. It is my team lost. I cannot admit that my team wasn't better than the other team. Therefore, the other team, there must have been some shenanigans involved. And then it makes it easier to deal with a loss. I try not to do that. Certainly when I was younger, I was much more prone to it. So in my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, sure, I might have said, hey, that guy's a dirty player, yada, yada. Sure. But this is my 9th year now covering it on the channel and having watched how fans talk and then reflecting back on me, things I've said over the years, and I realized, You know, I think I had that wrong, and I think I had that wrong often. So that's why I try not to post videos when I'm upset. I try not to post videos if I'm PO'd about a result, PO'd about a play. I try not to post the videos until I've settled myself down. There are definitely times where I feel like that's not fair, that shouldn't have happened. But I'm not going to bring it into a video because I know it's a subjective opinion. It's not objective. There's no facts necessarily behind it. And with Colin Campbell, I'm not saying he's a great person. I'm not going to say that. There are definitely instances where I would say it might have been able to keep him out of the Hall of Fame. I was surprised when he got named to the Hall of Fame in 2024 as much as anybody, but I don't see that big conspiracy that just because they have an assistant general managers related to Colin Campbell, that's why Florida was one of the most dominant teams I've watched in the 2025 playoffs. Numerous times during the 2025 playoffs, I talked about just the dominance the Panthers had. And they lost that dominance a bit in that series against Toronto. I honestly thought Toronto was going to knock them off, and then Florida just figured it out. Against Edmonton, it looked like Edmonton could take them out, and then they figured it out. They won that game in overtime. Marchand got the goal, and from there going forward, it was pretty much Florida's series. Battle of Florida on the brain. But yeah, I don't put a lot of stock into it, and it's the biggest excuse, I think, of the excuses when it comes to talking about the Florida Panthers. I find that odd. So if Gregory Campbell quit in Florida and if he decided to take an assistant job in Vancouver, does that mean that if he was the assistant GM in Vancouver, they automatically win the Stanley Cup? No, because that's just not how things work. So the lack of judgment shown by Colin Campbell at times, I don't punish Gregory Campbell for the sins of the father. That's how I view it. Now, not all dirty plays mean a fine or suspension is incoming. And this is an every night thing. So with there being 14 games tonight, there will be numerous incidents out of these 14 games that fans want fines, they want suspensions, they want revenge in the next game. There will be numerous plays where they say that goal shouldn't have counted, this wasn't goalie interference, this was goalie interference. There's going to be those numerous conversations. There's too many games for it not to be a conversation. But not every dirty hit ends up being a suspension. There are the ones where you get 5 in a game, and Department of Player Safety looks at the play and goes, 5 in a game is fair. We don't feel that there's a need for further discussion. Now, I do think Department of Player Safety could talk more to the public. I think they've been trying to the last couple of years. They've been willing to talk to GMs. They've been willing to talk to owners as well. I think that's a good start. I definitely think Department of Player Safety could do more. There's definitely more there I think that they could do to help people out. There have been times where they've posted videos saying this is the standard and this is what and they have to keep it. Now, where I just kind of tune out at least a little bit is when the conversation becomes kick this player out of the NHL. I don't think there's anybody in the National Hockey League that has ever done anything to warrant kicking them out of the league. And in order to do so, the NHLPA would fight that immediately. That player would be reinstated at some point, and the league would probably lose any challenge for that on legal grounds too. So you'd have to be able to show that you're taking them out of the league for something that violates their contract, and a cross-check wouldn't necessarily violate a contract. Sucker punch will not violate their contract. So when I see kick so-and-so out of the league, I don't have a response to that because it's not going to happen. It's a non-starter. The Panthers excel in physical games. I think this is where people are like, we should give the Florida Panthers some of their own medicine. That's playing into their hands. I've talked about this for years. If your team, your favorite hockey team, whoever they are, decide they're going to go out and just punch every Florida Panther in the head, Florida accepts that challenge. Florida's fine with that challenge. Florida will then see that and raise you punches right back. The Florida Panthers can play any style of hockey. They're not scared of a physical game. They're not scared of fighting. Most of these guys on this team are not scared of fighting. And we'll come back to that because I think it does highlight a conflict with hockey fans that I see that I do want to talk a little bit about. So they excel in the physical games, and I think they adapt to the opposition. If they're playing against a team that's high-flying, they can play that way. If they're playing against a team that just chokes the game off down the middle and plays a boring style of game, all right, Florida can play that way if they need to win the game. They will adapt to the other team. Now, the whole tax thing is always going to be part of the reason people hate the Florida Panthers. Like I said, I'm trying to incorporate everything here. But I've said this during this summer, and I've said it before. The no taxes involve Florida, Tampa, Dallas, Nashville, Vegas, and Seattle. Florida's got a couple Stanley Cups, yes. Tampa Bay won in 2020 and 2021. But was it the no tax, or was it the fact they were using LTIR? Because if they needed to use LTIR, then the no tax thing didn't help them because they didn't have a cap compliant team. This is where things kind of fall apart quickly, right? And so that's where. So did they need the taxes or not need? Because if they didn't, then what's with the LTIR? Those two things seem to conflict. Dallas hasn't won squat. They've lost against Edmonton in back-to-back years. So Dallas has not got over the hump. Nashville's never really been a consistent contender. They get to the final in 2017. They win a President's Trophy in 2018. And then there was the slow drop until they missed the playoffs. They made the playoffs surprisingly in 2024. They missed the playoffs in 2025. Barry Trotz spent his money in the summer of 2024. And there was discussions about what a deal it was getting Marchessault as well as Stamkos on the cap hits they got. However, the performance on the ice didn't match. So even if you want to make the argument that Bill Zito has this huge advantage as GM, he still has to know where to spend his money and on who. We're watching as GMs around the NHL are spending their money for next year, and where they're spending it and on who may not make a lot of sense. So when people just want to go to the tax thing and say, well, that's why Florida's really good is the taxes, cool. What about all the GMs before Zito that weren't able to put together a championship team? There have been some good general managers in Florida, but they did not put a championship team on the ice. And Zito's made all the right moves since then. So the tax thing is, let's get to LTIR. Because the loophole's been closed. But what happened? Petrangelo's put on, and I know this is Vegas, but it's related. Petrangelo's put on LTIR, won't play the entire season, so they can write off the entire amount. He is guaranteed not to come back for the playoffs. And immediately I start seeing comments of, well, Vegas planned for that so they could go over the cap. This is still circumvention. So people who want to say that now, the LTIR loophole wasn't the problem. They just don't like the no tax teams. They just don't like certain teams. There were no complaints about the Montreal Canadiens having $10.5 million for Carey Price on LTIR the whole season. And people are going to say, well, we knew he wasn't coming back. But still, if LTIR is this huge problem, then shouldn't it be that people get mad at it for every team? But the idea that a team would plan to not have a top four defenseman is just bonkers. But it is what it is. And the Panthers did not do that with Sasha Barkov. The Panthers did not say, he won't come back for the regular season of the playoffs. So they are playing short, and they've got that $10 million. There's some cap relief there by putting him in LTIR, but it is not as much cap relief as it was years back. And so they can't use the LTIR loophole, which they used this last season. For all of the complaints, it is weird because Seth Jones, if they were doing a playoff salary cap, Seth Jones would have put him over the cap. Pretty sure that would have put him over the cap, which means that they would have been over the cap, although it's a no-tax state. Basically, the teams that are looking for that competitive advantage are the ones that people get mad at. And I think the teams looking for a competitive advantage, if they can find it within the collective bargaining agreement and do it in a way that the NHL doesn't get mad about it, I can't get mad at those teams. I can get upset with the league about certain things, but I don't get mad at a team for taking advantage of a system that works for them. So, looking at their current roster, and I wanted to put asterisks next to players that have been called dirty over the last few weeks or just in general. So you got Barkov. I haven't seen him called a dirty player. I've seen people complain about him staying down when he got hit there in the playoffs with the hit that got, I think, what was it, Hagel, and Hagel ends up getting suspended. Yeah, it hurt. Like, I always find it weird when people are like, yeah, maybe you stayed down there. Yeah, I don't know. Let that NHL player hit you like that and see how long you stay. Apparently, you just jump right back up. Bennett, I will agree. Bennett is on that line. And is he a dirty player at times? Yes. But when I see people talk about like Stolarz, I didn't see enough there to tell me he should be suspended. And what I found interesting with the Stolarz thing in the playoffs last year was people got angrier and angrier every day. So on the night that happened, people were upset. But then, like, a couple weeks later, felt like people were talking about it more. And they're like, well, look what he did to Stolarz, and he's just a monster. And it's like, okay, so this hate just gets bigger every time people talk to each other and they get that feedback. And that feedback's confirming what they believe. Then they just get angrier and angrier, right? Boquist not dirty. Gadjevich, I didn't put an asterisk next to, but we know Gadjevich can drop the gloves. There may be somebody out there who remembers something Gadjevich has done to qualify him as dirty. I don't know of any. Greer is a fourth liner. He's willing to drop the gloves if you want him to. Doesn't mean to do it every time. I always find it funny when I say a guy's willing to drop the gloves. People go, actually, he didn't drop the gloves last week. He was in a game. He was challenged to a fight. And he totally skated away like a loser. It's like, okay, so they don't accept every single fight. Doesn't mean they don't fight. But yeah, Greer, fourth liner. I think it's interesting how Florida picks up guys that have been around the league like Greer has, and they make it work. They make these players work in their system. I still don't think if he had been suspended before that game between Tampa and Florida, I don't think we see any less penalty minutes in that game. I think the emotions are up so high every time these teams play against each other. It reminds me of the old battles between Montreal and Quebec, the old battles between Montreal and Florida. Montreal was involved in a lot of them. The Battle of Alberta was quite literally a battle some nights. There were definitely nights in the National Hockey League back in the 80s and the 90s where, yeah, almost everybody was off the benches. There were dirty hits being thrown right, left, center. You're going to get bench clearing brawls, just not in the 90s, but in the early 80s. Just bonkers. And I remember that hockey. So when I watch hockey now, I still remember that hockey, and I think it's questionable, it's borderline, but I still remember how bad things were. Gregor, I don't think Gregor's been accused of being dirty. Cunnin, these guys haven't been with Florida long enough to get that. Lindell, I don't think Lindell's been accused of being dirty. Luostarinen, and I'm doing this too because some of the comments I've seen are that every member of the Florida Panthers plays the same way and they should all be kicked out of the NHL, which is dramatic. I think if the NHL came out tomorrow and said, we're going to contract the league, we're going to get rid of the Florida Panthers because NHL fans think they're a dirty team, so we're just going to get that team out of there. I don't know that that's the right way to go, because the next thing that's going to happen is every other team's going to get off that radar. Before you know it, you wouldn't have a team left. Luostarinen, I don't think there's been anything with Luostarinen. Marchand, all I have to say is the name. Obviously, Marchand has an asterisk. There's definitely been some plays over his career. Reinhart, I don't think there's been anything with Reinhart. Rodriguez, I don't think there has been. Samoskevich, far too young to have an asterisk next to his name at this point. Schwint just got back, so no asterisk there. Verhaeghe and Tkachuk, both of them, there's been accusations. Verhaeghe, of course, very recently. And Tkachuk, it just feels like there's a reputation thing as well as, there's the occasional incident here and there. But I don't see two-handed stick swing violence as much. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not trying to excuse dirty plays. And I think where people get caught up is that Department of Player Safety is definitely inconsistent. Very inconsistent. I'll go through the defensemen and the goaltenders and we'll discuss that. So on the blue line, you got Belinskas, Bjornfoot. I don't think anybody's talked about them being dirty. People talk about Ekblad. I think my favorite one now is, now everybody says Ekblad was on steroids. No. And I'm saying everybody, obviously not meaning absolutely everybody, but the comment I've started seeing is he was on steroids. No, he wasn't. Nope. But he's a Panther, so all right. But yeah, and he got a long suspension there as well. So that's weird because the NHL favors them, but they suspended Ekblad multiple times in the last 12 months. Forsling, I don't understand anything about Forsling being dirty. Jones, closest I could come is Chicago fans thinking he was lazy last year before the trade. Kulikov, Mikula, Petrie, I don't think there's much with them either. And obviously in that, Bobrovsky's not a dirty goaltender. Tarasov just arrived. So there's definitely some just arriveds here that maybe during the season we'll see fans get mad at him, but nothing as of yet. So we'll come over to this after this. And then I promise we're done. And like I said, this puts a bow on it. Won't have to discuss it again. Should there be automatic suspensions? I have for years said yes. Certain plays, certain incidents at certain times, it should be automatic. And there should be a standard. And I think that would go a long way. So basically, this play happens, we know that's a suspension. And it should be dictated by the 5 in a game a player gets that you would know a suspension's coming as well after that. Obviously, the NHL would have to work with the NHLPA on this. They'd have to work with Department of Player Safety. And I will say a complete revamp of Department of Player Safety, I don't think is the worst idea in the world. I am not saying Department of Player Safety gets things right every time, because they don't. I also think that the idea that there's some kind of cabal that's deciding all this and certain teams won't get... I can't get there. And I can't get there because it does evolve. I know people were like, well, he's talking about these other teams, but what's he talking about? Because 6 years ago, nobody was complaining about the Panthers and were complaining about other teams being dirty. When I said I don't remember people saying the Blues were dirty in the 2019 Stanley Cup run. Now there's a whole bunch of comments saying the Blues were terrible. They were really dirty during that Stanley Cup run. Those were terrible plays. There's always that perception that a team is dirty when they go to the Stanley Cup. I think part of it is that what we've seen with Tampa and now with Florida is teams that have gone to multiple Stanley Cups in a row. And so it means that fans get tired of them. Fans don't want to see them in the final again. And then it's going to be, well, they're only there because the league wants them there. That's the only reason they're there, which comes back to that idea that my team is infallible. My team can't have lost fairly. It has to be something the league did. It has to be something dirty those guys did. It's that play that happened in Game 3. Once that was allowed, everything fell apart. Now, I do think that if the officials talk to the press on some level, I think that could help. But I think we'd get a lot of no comment. I think we'd also get a lot of, I didn't see that play, I can't comment on it. I think that would happen. Referees are fallible, they're human, and I'm old enough to remember, being an old man, when there was one referee on the ice, there was always stuff happening behind the scenes. There were always sucker punches, high sticks, cross checks. There was always stuff going on behind, because they know where the referee was looking. It's just the one referee. And so, whoops, elbowed you in the face. Sorry, ref didn't see it. That was really a big part of the reason why the NHL eventually went to officials, because players were getting faster, bigger, stronger. It was getting more and more difficult to police the league. And so in a league where people say, oh, the league should police itself. No, you get 322 penalty minutes in a game when the league decides to police itself. That is a failure of Department of Player Safety. That is absolutely a failure of Department of Player Safety. Now, I wanted to mention a few comments because I find them odd. First off, the league's too soft. I see this a lot, and yet the one team that seems to play old-style hockey, Florida Panthers being one that absolutely can, and people get mad at them. They're not a soft team, so I guess there's that in between there, but generally the players that are very physical, the players that throw a lot of hits, the players who drop the gloves, they're going to throw more violent hits. They're not going to be scared of a guy getting mad and dropping the gloves after. They might hit a little bit harder than the other guys do. I miss the good old days is one that I see too. They'd take care of this in the good old days. Yeah, during the bench clearing brawls, guys having their careers ended by hits to the head at center ice. Good times. Nah. There was always the idea that the skill players were protected by the enforcer, but I seem to remember Mario Lemieux retiring because there wasn't protection for him at one point. He would come back into the league, but that was a complaint of his. And he played through that era where the enforcer, makes sure that the star player is okay and there's no concern. So there's always going to be those dirty plays because the enforcer that people want back, the enforcers were usually the ones throwing the hits, the plays, the stick swinging. The guys who get 20-plus game suspensions were very often the enforcers. And who's going to enforce the enforcers? It's who's going to watch the watchmen. It's all over again, right? So I don't think bringing back enforcers. The other problem is nobody's an enforcer as a kid. Nobody's an enforcer in juniors now. So where do the enforcers come from? You'd have to train these pros to be enforcers, but coaches like to have 12 forwards that can play. They like to have 6 defensemen that can play. They like to have guys who can take regular shifts. There will not be a return of enforcers, and considering how violent the NHL was during that, the time of the enforcer, which started in the 70s. I mean, I guess there was some 60s definitely had that as well. John Ferguson, Eddie Shack. My parents told me stories. But yeah, so the other one that I get a kick out of is, and I see this complaint at times, players don't hate each other anymore. They're always smiling. They're always smiling at each other. They're always talking across on the face. What happened to when they hate each other? This is what happens when they hate each other. This is what happens when the players detest one another, is you end up with plays where maybe they're not taking the other player's safety into account. I can throw this. I'm going to throw this. It's going to happen. It's going to be a great hit. I might get suspended. I might not. So the hate that people want in the game, the old style hockey people want in the game, I don't think they do, because they complain constantly about these plays that by 20 years ago, by those standards, wouldn't have been considered all that difficult to deal with. Wouldn't have been considered suspension worthy for sure. So those are the comments I wanted to throw out there. And when you do what, in the case of Tampa, what they did Tampa win that game? No. Did Tampa in that game learn anything about their team? Not really. So what happened was they threw away that last exhibition game to try to get back at Florida for what happened in the previous game. And coming out of that game, it doesn't appear that Florida has any long-term injuries, but Tampa may. So that's where it gets tricky for me, is I don't think that for when people say, well, I think everybody should play against Tampa like that, or everybody should play against Florida like that, like Tampa did. I don't think that hurts Florida, but I think it'll hurt other teams. I think if we get to the point where the league's like, we're all going to go out and beat up the Florida Panthers, good luck. This is a team that's played a lot of hockey over the last 3 years. I think it's 319 games over the last 3 seasons. It's a ridiculous amount of games. It's the most games any team's played over 3 seasons. They're going to wear down. It's going to happen. It is very, very difficult to continually put up with over 100 games a year and still have more energy than the other teams you're against. So at some point, they're going to lose. It could very well be this season. There's definitely a lot of talk about dynasty. There's definitely pressure there. So I do look forward to the day when somebody else is going to be the most hated team. Somebody else is going to be the dirtiest team. It is probably going to be the next Stanley Cup champion, whoever that's going to be. It could be Vegas again. Maybe Tampa goes on a run. They get that reputation. Because that's how it works in the National Hockey League. That's how it's always worked in the National Hockey League. I've seen the comments over the last couple weeks, because I do scour the internet trying to see what people are saying, even on Reddit, for instance. And it generally seems to be that the NHL's got it in for certain teams. They favor certain teams, but the teams they favor seem to change over the years. And there doesn't seem to be a rhyme nor reason for it, although the Gregory Campbell one is a convenient one for Florida, as if they weren't President's Trophy winners before that, as if they hadn't gone to the Stanley Cup final before he was the AGM. But hey, it's out there. It's an easy one, right? Because it appeals to that idea that people in upper management are corrupt, and it's an easy message to sell people on. Very, very easy one to sell people on. And it means that when your team loses in the playoffs against them, you can say, well, of course, they never had a chance because Colin Campbell is still an executive in the National Hockey League. So that way you don't have to address anything that happened in the series. You can just go, that's what happened. That's what did it. And I can't do that. As I've said before, and I'll say it again here one last time, If I believed that, I wouldn't be running a hockey channel. I wouldn't be the hockey guy. But thank you guys so much for all your support as always. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always as well. Trying to take an even keel view on all this. And yeah, thank you guys so much for all your support. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. That being said, I'm done for now. I'll talk to you again soon.